Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is Adam with Ocean Conservancy. Thank you everyone for joining our call today on the proposed fiscal year 2019 budget for Commerce, Justice, Science, which funds NOAA. The Trump administration and the Office of Management and Budget just released the details yesterday, and we got our look at the NOAA Blue Book. We are hosting this webinar and call today to provide more context regarding the federal budget, specifically for NOAA, and the things we all as constituents can do to affect it. But first, I'd like to welcome our special guest, House Oceans Caucus Co-Chair, Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici, to give her thoughts. Congresswoman Bonamici was sworn in as member of the U.S. House of Representatives on February 7th, 2012, and it has been our pleasure to work with such an ocean champion since that time. She represents Oregon's 1st Congressional District, running northwest from Portland to Oregon's beautiful wooded northern coast. The Congresswoman was elected to her first term in the Oregon State House of Representatives in 2007, and in 2008 she was appointed and then elected to the State Senate. The Congresswoman serves as the ranking member of the Environment Subcommittee for the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. In that role, she has been a voice in support of healthy oceans and science-based environmental regulations. She is also particularly concerned about tsunamis and their effects, including marine debris. We're honored to be joined by you today, Congresswoman.
Thank you so much, Adam, and thank you, Ocean Conservancy, and everyone who's on this call today. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about this, the President's fiscal year 2019 budget proposal, especially how it affects NOAA. Now, obviously, the whole thing came out yesterday, but I do want to share my initial thoughts. But first, before I do that, I really want to thank you for all the work that you do to promote ocean health, science, research, education, volunteer work, leadership. It really does make a difference. Your advocacy and your voice have made a difference in the past and will continue to do so, in fact, now more than ever. So as you heard in the introduction, that very kind introduction, I represent the 1st Congressional District in Oregon, and the northern boundary is the Columbia River, and the western boundary is the beautiful, rugged Pacific Ocean and that beautiful western coastline. And I know as a policymaker and as an Oregonian how important it is that we have healthy marine resources and a healthy ocean. And the Oregon economy relies on tourism, but also the fishing industry, and I know how important that is to the economy of other parts of the country as well. And I'm really honored to be the Oceans Caucus co-chair, following in the steps of Representative Sam Farr, who I was so thrilled when he invited me and asked me to take over that position. It's really an honor to do that. Big shoes to fill. But I've been working, of course, with my co-chair, Alaska's Representative Don Young, who, of course, has a significant amount of coastline. We're focused right now on many things, but primarily addressing marine debris. We're working together on the Save Our Seas Act that will call upon the State Department to work with countries around the world on how we can reduce marine debris, including waste management and infrastructure. Our bill also reauthorizes NOAA's marine debris program for 5 years. That's working on a large scale removal of marine debris and research and prevention. So there is important work bipartisan work going on, and I want people to understand that we still are continuing to find common ground on many issues. In fact, this week there's another meeting of the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus. So with regard to the President's budget, I am again very disappointed with the budget that this President and administration have released yesterday. A budget is a statement of values and priorities, and there are many things in this budget that do not align with the priorities of the constituents I represent out in Northwest Oregon. This budget does not recognize the amazing work that's being done by our nation's scientists and researchers and how their work contributes to the public health and the economy. The budget underfunds and undervalues NOAA's core mission, especially understanding and predicting changes in climate and weather, oceans and coasts, as well as conservation and management of coastal and marine ecosystems and resources. So that the proposal would drastically reduce funds for National Ocean Service, Oceanic and Atmospheric Research, and the National Weather Service. So the list sadly goes on. The other targeted cuts include the Ocean Acidification Program, and that is critical as we see ocean acidification affecting the health of our ocean, of our shellfish industry, of our fishing industry. So I'm really disappointed that that is a targeted cut. Also, the ocean surface and marine observation systems, climate and weather research, again, critical. Fisheries, habitat restoration, the tsunami warning program that I worked so hard to reauthorize over the years, and research grants for universities and many other programs and funding sources that support the work that you are doing in our communities across the country. One of the things that this budget seeks to terminate are the grants that coastal states rely on for management and resilience assistance. So those include the Sea Grant Program, the Pacific Coastal Salmon Recovery Fund, which has bipartisan support, and many others. I know that this is a challenging time for Congress and for our country. It's every day it seems like a new surprise, but it really is not as unlike times, and it's easy to be important and critical, in fact, for us to continue making our voices heard and for us to hear from you. And one of the things that I want to emphasize that I did last year when the president released the administration's budget proposal is that this is just a proposal. And the good news is that it is the responsibility of Congress to write the budget and enact the budget and decide government funding levels. So many of the programs I mentioned have bipartisan support. So you have the opportunity to contact your members of Congress and explain to them why your work matters, why what you're doing is so important in your community, and importantly, help them understand how the cuts to these programs will harm the work that's happening in the districts they represent and to their constituents. It helps so much to have those stories about how the budget and the policies that are enacted here in Congress are affecting work back home in the districts we represent. So don't be the only ones to speak out. Encourage your colleagues and people with whom you volunteer, members of your organizations, et cetera, to do so. And this really does make a difference. You know, over the past year, we've fought back against many of these cuts in the past, and we need to do that again. So just, emphasizing that, the separate branches of government and the checks and balances that we have, that it is Congress's responsibility. And so making your voices heard to your members of Congress is really important. So again, thank you for all of your work that you're doing as we go through this process and continue to see how this proposed budget is being received across the country and in Congress. Again, make your voices heard to your member of Congress, because we here at the Capitol will be the branch of government that is actually doing the budget and the funding. So thank you again for the opportunity to join you.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. We know things are very hectic on Capitol Hill now and always, and you have to get to your next important event. But thank you so much for taking the time.
Of course, happy to, and look forward to seeing you all and working with you going forward. Thanks for all you do.
Thank you. Okay, so what a wild ride it has been for NOAA's budget. Last year, President Trump proposed deep cuts to NOAA, including scrapping such vital programs as Sea Grant and Coastal Zone Management grants. The House of Representatives budget was better for NOAA, and then the Senate's was even a step up from there. We at Ocean Conservancy would like to thank you and all NOAA supporters for engaging with your elected officials. Your voices were heard, and we know the importance from what the Congresswoman just said. But the saga of the fiscal year 2018 budget is not over. And now the President's fiscal year 2019 proposal again includes drastic cuts to NOAA. Today, we will walk through the key features of the President's proposed NOAA budget. Then we'll talk about important ways that you can engage your senators and representatives as they work on their proposals. After all of that, we'll open it up to questions. A couple of quick logistical things before we dive in. For me to be able to unmute you so that you can ask a question, if you dialed in, you must enter your audio pin. There will be a screenshot later to indicate where you can find that if you did not yet enter it. If you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand in the GoToWebinar app. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Addie Hoy, Government Relations, Ocean Conservancy.
Hi, everybody. This is Addie. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have so many of you on the line interested in this important topic. And Congresswoman Bonamici gave a fantastic summary, and I'm just going to fill in a couple of holes in that summary to make sure you have the whole picture, and then we'll toss it back to Adam so that he can share with you some of the steps that you can take to have an impact, just as the Congresswoman laid out. So the top line, the big headline really this week, is that the Trump administration budget was released yesterday. Not to be a scene out of the movie Groundhog Day, but it's very similar to the budget from last year, and unfortunately actually is even a little bit worse probably for NOAA. There are many programs that President Trump proposed eliminating last year that are again on the chopping block. Those include programs like Sea Grant and Coastal Zone Management Grants, Regional Coastal Resilience Grants, National Estuarine Research Reserves, Prescott Grants for Marine Mammals, the Marine Mammal Commission, and the list goes on and on. In addition to some of the fights that we had to fight last year, there are some new cuts, which we'll go over. But it just shows that continued attention really needs to be paid to these key ocean issues that the administration unfortunately seems to see as expendable. But let me take a step back first. There's a larger context here, and the news has been moving fast and furious on these issues, so I just want to take a quick second to share with you old news, last week's news, which is old news around here these days. Last week, a bipartisan budget deal was struck by the Senate and the House and passed Congress and signed by the President. And that budget deal clears the way for Congress to actually finish fiscal year 2018. So as you have probably seen in the great emails that Adam sends summarizing where things stand, we are still under a continuing resolution that just extends last year's funding. We have not yet passed a new budget for NOAA for this fiscal year, despite the fact that we're many months into it, which is unfortunate. But with the budget deal that passed last week, it did a couple of things that are important to getting us to a final fiscal year 2018 budget for this year. So first, that set budget caps, and the caps are really important so that all the members of Congress are agreed to the total amount of funding. And so now, with a budget cap in place, Congress is feverishly working to get to an omnibus, or sort of the more detailed bill that will have NOAA's budget in it by late March. So that's a process that we're watching and something that we'll be paying really close attention to and sharing information with you as we go. Second, as part of the budget deal that passed, there was a deal reached on funding for hurricane recovery. And in that deal, there's $400 million in emergency funding for NOAA to address last year's hurricane season, as well as fisheries disasters in hurricane impacted areas and around the country. We sent a summary last week, on Friday actually, of everything that was in that hurricane supplemental, but it included $18 million for marine debris, which is a really important issue to be addressed. It included $100 million for better forecasting of future hurricanes and flooding, and as I mentioned, fisheries disaster at a level of $200 million. And these funds are obviously really critical for Texas, Puerto Rico, Florida, and and the areas that were impacted by hurricanes, but it helps other regions too, because it really relieves pressure on the annual budget. You don't have NOAA staff figuring out how to clean up marine debris after Hurricane Maria and Hurricane Irma while also addressing issues in Oregon or Alaska that the Congresswoman was talking about a few minutes ago. So that happened last week. We've got a budget deal in place that both cleared the major impasse of hurricane funding that had been under discussion for many months, and also set the budget caps that allowed Congress to move forward to finalize the fiscal year 2018 process. Unfortunately, these processes are all sort of jumbling into each other. So what we saw released yesterday by the administration, what we want to talk about in large part today, was sort of the kickoff, if you will, of budget season in Washington for the fiscal year 2019 budget, which starts this upcoming fall. And really, what we saw there are a couple of things. First, a quick caveat. You'll see in the charts that we included in our emails some sort of detailed information and detailed comparisons. I want to be clear that our charts compare the budget proposal to the fiscal year 2017 omnibus, which is the current funding. It looks a little bit different from the NOAA's Blue Book because we chose to use a different baseline, in part because, as I just mentioned, the fiscal year 2018 budget for NOAA has not been written by Congress and passed yet. And so when we see that budget, we'll take a look at that as well and make those comparisons. So if you have questions about that, you can certainly bring those up in the Q&A, or I'd be happy to talk offline with anybody trying to understand those charts as well. In terms of what's in there, the Congresswoman covered a lot of this, so I'll try to move quickly through it. In the National Ocean Service, we see coastal zone management grants, regional coastal resilience grants, estuarine research reserves, and competitive research proposed for complete elimination. We see a cut to the IU's regional observations of about a third, which is a new target for cuts. It wasn't something that we saw last year. And very deep in the documents, we also see a $500,000 cut to the marine debris program, which is something that we'll be paying close attention to. In NIMFs, or NOAA fisheries, we see an enforcement cut of 25%, which is another new cut that wasn't an area targeted by the president last year, so something new to keep an eye on. And also cuts to the community-based restoration program and to fisheries management lines, which is always surprising considering the support that those enjoy. Those cuts are in interjurisdictional fisheries grants and even in areas like stock assessments. In the Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research, the climate research, which I think the Congresswoman mentioned as well, cut nearly $60 million, which is twice of last year's cut. That's another area where this budget is in fact worse even than the terrible one we saw last year, as well as cuts in ocean exploration and ocean acidification there in the science budget. In the National Weather Service, tsunami warnings were cut, another priority the Congresswoman mentioned, and that's a cut that was proposed last year. Despite recent events in Alaska and along the West Coast and other places, that cut continues to be proposed. And the Pacific Coast Salmon Recovery Fund also proposed for elimination. And just a note on marine mammals, the Marine Mammal Commission and Prescott grants for marine mammal stranding networks both proposed for elimination, along with a cut to the line for protected resources for marine mammals and sea turtles of $500,000. So, you know, if you take what we saw last year and what we talked about over the course of the last year or so, and you add some of these new cuts, you know, these cuts would really be devastating, especially to the external community that relies on grants to do work in their communities and also for science. So what can we do about it? This budget didn't happen, it wasn't proposed in a vacuum. We've got a lot of moving parts, and we've now got increased budget caps that give us a very realistic opportunity to ensure that NOAA funding doesn't backslide or stagnate. And we've got members like Congresswoman Bonamici in Congress that can really help to stand up and fight. So the issues I think we face are a couple. First, it's really noisy in Washington and there's a lot of competing priorities. So we have to make sure that oceans stay on the list and coastal states stay on the list. And we also worry that, you know, the massive proposed cuts in the Trump budget make smaller cuts look palatable or look reasonable or relatively okay. And that's certainly something we want to be clear on, that backsliding in the budget is a real problem. So as someone who spends most of my time on Capitol Hill. I can't tell you all how important it is for representatives and senators to hear from you during this budget season. You're the folks who know what's going on the ground where you live and where you work and where you play and where your families live and where your communities are. And sharing your views, your stories, and your priorities with members of Congress is critical. And I think we heard that from Congressman Bonamici, but just to reiterate how important that is. I really look forward to questions about anything that's in the budget or anything that you're concerned about. But first, let me pass it back to Adam, who's going to give us a rundown on how you can engage, and then we'll have questions.
Thanks, Addie. As Congresswoman Bonamici said earlier, and as Addie has reiterated, this is just a proposal. The power of appropriations lies with Congress, not with the President. And that means that we have the opportunity to engage with our elected officials on behalf of NOAA funding, both for the current fiscal year and the next. We, especially with the new caps, we don't want to allow backsliding in any of NOAA's vital programs. In an email that will be sent around to webinar registrants later, we will link to an appropriations advocacy toolkit outlining ways you can engage. Other tools, for lack of a better term, will also be linked to in the email, including a detailed spreadsheet of cuts to inform you and your activities. One method of engagement is writing something public. Members of Congress receive daily press clippings from local papers, and those compile things like op-eds, letter to the editor, and other local and more far-flung news pieces that touch on pressing topics in their district. There is significant value in having a written product that explains why you care about something, why it's important to you, and why others in the district and beyond should also care about it. A member of Congress pays attention to these public forms of communication. One of the things that will be linked to in the email will be an op-ed template, helping you to craft your own op-eds for placement in local papers. If you do get a piece placed, letting us know that it was placed will really help our broader advocacy efforts, and we would love to bring attention to it. Also, Ocean Conservancy has a blog series we're running called The More You NOAA. We'll get back to that catchy phrase with social media, which focuses on the threats that budget cuts pose to NOAA through a storytelling lens. If you have a story and want it to be part of that blog series, if it was not accepted with the local paper, or if you feel it is more appropriate as a blog post, we would love to work with you and get that up in our More You NOAA blog series. For social media is king of the hill these days and gets lots of attention, and there is data to back up that engaging with members of Congress online is effective in raising the profile of an issue. A report by the Congressional Management Foundation found that 76% of congressional staffers agree or strongly agree that social media enables meaningful interaction with constituents. And social media posts by constituents can influence undecided senators and representatives. There are some best practices to ensure that your engagement online is truly informative for the staff and elected officials, and we explain that in more detail in the toolkit. Highlights of online engagement include making sure to tag your member of Congress, include links to more information, including op-eds or a More You NOAA blog post, and keep your post succinct and to the point. And according to Twitter itself, tweets are more paid attention to if they have hashtags, and we are proud to have gotten hashtag The More You NOAA off the ground, and we hope you may consider using that. There are also tried and true methods of engaging with your members, calling or email members. They catalog all of those calls and emails and all of those opinions, and they really do matter. And then also, if there are any town halls or other events organized in your district that you would like to attend to be heard, we encourage you to do that.